Hey guys, I'm confused. Recently, NCRT, which is the main textbook that Indian schools use, changed their syllabus in history, which makes the Mughals and other Islamic invaders look like they were all horrible people who looted and pillaged their way through the whole subcontinent and destroyed many temples. But I remember from our childhood, our textbooks only really villainized Aurangzeb and viewed the rest of the Mughals as mostly a positive force, at least when compared to the British. So, which version is true? The old one. Oi! Alright, let's do a debate. You guys pick a Muslim king and make sure he's a popular one. We do need the engagement on this YouTube video. And give points on whether he was a great king or not. Alright. Okay, so I'll decide. Chronologically, we're supposed to do the Khilji dynasty next. So why don't we do this concept with Allauddin Khilji? I will go first. I think Padmavat is deeply inaccurate as it shows Allauddin Khilji as a who takes whatever he wants and behaves savagely. When in reality he was just a very refined man who patronized art and architecture. When he wasn't conquering, he was making public infrastructure. He expanded the Qutub complex and he built good-looking things like Alai Darwaza and Siri Fort in Delhi. That seems nice. And let's not forget the great poet Amir Khusro. He composed hundreds of poems in not only in Persian but also in Punjabi and Hindavi. Hindavi being the precursor to Hindi. With that, he used local languages to build inroads into the people of India. People in the Mamluk dynasty were deposed for building less connections. Amir Khusro is also considered the father of Qawwali, which is undoubtedly an Indian subcontinent heritage, mixing the ideas of Hinduism and Islam into the beautiful Sufi music. All of this funded by Khilji. You have to admit that he tried his best to convert Delhi Sultanate, which was a colonial enterprise at this point at best, into a local rule. He even made the language Hindavi as the lingua franca of his empire instead of Persian in order to connect the disparate regions of his empire. Really? Yes. Use art to whitewash the crimes against humanity that he committed. Crimes against humanity? Khilji expanded his empire in every direction. He left death and destruction in his wake, destroying temples and social fabric of every city or town or village that he visited. His campaigns, famous for mass killings of civilians and enslavement and mass conversions, especially targeting Hindu kingdom. The famous temples of Mathura and Vrindavan, which had stood for at least 1,000 years by this point, were desecrated by him. It wasn't even a newly conquered land for him. It was part of the land that he inherited. He just destroyed it out of his whim. That's awful. But temples can be rebuilt. Lives cannot return. Allauddin Khilji captured women en masse and sold them into slavery as war booty. He would take women from royal families into his own harem after killing their family by his own hand. He committed atrocities that would make Muhammad Ghazni look like a child. All of this is written by Amir Khusro positively in his history. I can see from religious ideological views why destroying temples might be seen as a positive by a Muslim king. But enslaving people and mass murder of people, how can it ever be seen positive? It was all in the service to the conquest. A conquest which laid the groundwork for a united subcontinent. He was the first Islamic conqueror to go this far south into the subcontinent, and honestly, he was the first conqueror in the subcontinent at all to go this far south since the Mauryan Empire. And since then, it had been 1600 years. He built infrastructure and linguistic inroads into the Deccan that connect the Deccan kingdoms to the north to this day. This allowed for later empires like Tughlaq dynasty, the Mughals, and yes, even the Marathas to complete their conquest of most of the subcontinent. His reform centralized power and made it easier for the rulers to raise taxes and effectively spent it for the betterment of the empire. He made sure that the price of each essential product sold in his markets was not unfairly priced through the market regulations, which was a relief for the common folks. He also made sure that the state granaries were always stocked to prevent famines. A lot of his policies continued well into the Maratha Empire. Without these policies, it might have been more difficult to rule such a vast swath of land. And without him, a united India possibly could have been impossible. Uniting under the banner of someone this cruel, I am sure the people were thrilled. Even if the conquest was over and you survived with your dignity intact, you would be treated as a second-class citizen. You would never be offered any position close to power. Contrasting with the Mughals, which would often offer Hindu kings to be local rulers or administrators. And even contrasting with the Tughlaq dynasty, who would go out of their way to educate the local population. Khilji dynasty made the lives of Hindus miserable. He levied the jizya tax on the Hindus for the first time, and it wasn't some measly 20-30% on your income that later kings would levy, and it wasn't even like Aurangzeb, who would make income tax slabs like a sane governor. If you were poor under Aurangzeb, you might even be exempt from paying jizya. And if you were somewhere in the middle, you'd pay less, and if you were rich, you'd pay more. That wasn't the case with Allauddin Khilji. The jizya tax rate was the same across the socio-economic status of yours. That drove a lot of poor people to malnourishment and starved many more to death. He even stole food if you didn't have the coin to pay the tax. All of this, of course, caused great dissent amongst the people, which he put down with great ferocity and cruelty. Some of those dissenters were Mongols. Mongols who had come into India to settle during the previous century. These people often dissented to weaken the state to help the Chagatai Khanate attack the Sultanate and in extension India. If for whatever reason you weren't aware of who Mongols were, let me clue you in. In 1206 AD, a man named Temujin united all the tribes of Mongolia, taking the title of Khagan or Khan. To the rest of the world, he was called Genghis Khan. From this point on, he expanded in every direction, bringing death and destruction wherever he went. He built pyramids of skulls and destroyed whole civilizations. I have heard that they killed so many people that it even reversed some amount of global warming. Temujin's attempt to conquer India was foiled by the Mamluk dynasty, but the Mamluk dynasty had an advantage. The Mongols were not used to the hot conditions of India, so their attack was easy to repel. However, by the time of Allauddin Khilji, the Mongols had split into multiple factions, and one of those factions was used to the heat by this point, and this made them dangerous. They invaded 6 times during the Khilji dynasty, devastating the western frontier districts of the subcontinent. They even made it all the way to Delhi once and ransacked it. But somehow, because of the cleverness of Allauddin Khilji, the political class of Delhi survived, and the Mongols returned empty-handed. And then he built many forts to the western frontier to rout them away, and he used that to rout them away 2 more times before they stopped attacking his dynasty at least. This means that the unstoppable force that was the Mongols were only stopped by the Delhi Sultanate, and most ferociously by Allauddin Khilji. Had he not been there, I don't know what would have happened. I know exactly what would have happened had he not been there. The exact same thing that has already happened. You said that the Mongols erected pyramids of skulls. Well, so did Allauddin Khilji. To illustrate this, let's talk about Rani Padmini and Chittorgarh. During the siege of Chittorgarh, Allauddin Khilji starved out the population of a nearly impenetrable fort that was Chittorgarh and forced them to step outside to fight outside on his terms. This is standard siege warfare, so that's okay. But because it took so long to conquer this city, he ordered the massacre of everyone inside as well as everyone in the army. There was something strange about it all. All he found inside were non-combatant men and boys, all of whom were massacred without mercy. Some 30 to 40,000 non-combatant men were slaughtered, although it might be slight exaggeration. But then, what happened to the women? Well, as he went further inside the town, he found a crematorium full of the ashes of women who willingly jumped into the fire led by their queen Padmini to avoid being captured. They chose the freedom of death over the chains of captivity. I thought the story of Rani Padmini was fictional, coming from a poem from a few centuries later. The fictional aspect of the story is the name and the backstory of the queen. We have no records of what her real name was and where she came from, and the whole legend of Allauddin Khilji falling in love with her and all that. All of that's fictional, all created by poets from a few centuries later. But did the women of Chittorgarh commit Johar by jumping into fire led by their queen? Yes. Did Allauddin Khilji order the massacre of everyone else? Also yes. All of this is mentioned in the histories of Khusro. This wasn't the only time that this happened. 2 years before this, Khilji had laid siege on Ranthambore. Here too, he massacred every man, and here too, the women committed Johar rather than be caught. But this time, they did not have enough time to set up the sacrificial fire. So, led by their princess, Padmala, they jumped into the reservoir of the palace to take their life. And once more, all Khilji received was a ghost town and no slaves to claim. The bravery of these women, and honestly the men as well, demonstrate the will of the local people to not submit to these invaders. And these weren't the last or the first recorded instances of Johar in Indian history. Heck, there are 3 Johars that happened in Chittorgarh. Why should we hide the histories of such cruelty and such valor? Counterpoint to that was that it simply was the times. We cannot pin it to one king or one kind of people. We have instances of Mughals ordering their women to commit Johar in fights with the Ahomya kingdom, while no other culture had women self-immolate like the Indians. There was a lot of cultures where women killed themselves rather than be captured after defeat. Chief amongst them being the Japanese committing seppuku. Excluding these details is disingenuous and bad history. It means you are peddling a political agenda. I have no problems with the textbooks highlighting the cruelty of the Mughals and other Islamic conquerors, as long as they approach it with nuance, as long as they let us know that cruelty was not the monopoly of one kind of people, but the trend of the times. I can agree to that. Pre-modern times were a terrible time to live, and we should be grateful to be born in the time that we are. I think we often mold history into the narratives of who's the persecutor and who's the victim, and use that to inform our politics, when instead history should be used to learn from the mistakes of our ancestors and do better than them. What happened here? Who won this debate? Why don't you guys, the viewers, decide and write in the comment? Continue this debate, and see you next time.